All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to Hack the Mind, using psychology to boost online engagement from Mighty Citizen. Thanks again to everyone who decided to take an hour out of what I'm sure is a very busy day to spend some time talking about this stuff. And let's go ahead and just jump right in if that's okay with y'all. So let's take a look at this spinning figure. And in your mind, try to figure out, is she turning clockwise or counterclockwise? I'll give you a second. Clockwise or counterclockwise? All right, do you have your answer? So of course, as you might have already suspected, the answer is both. Of course, depending on your perspective. Let's do another little test here, shall we? I'm going to reveal some words in these triangles, and I want you to just read them aloud as you normally would, kind of as quickly as you might, okay? So just read these aloud and we'll see how it goes. All right, did you do it? Cool. So I'm guessing most of you said Paris in the spring, once in a lifetime, bird in the hand. But if you look closely, you might notice that those aren't actually the words. In the first triangle, it actually says Paris in the spring, a lifetime, the hand. Fascinating, right? Well, of course it is, because the brain is weird. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. The fact that the human mind is complex, often very irrational, and quite easily trickable. And so what do I want to accomplish by the end of this session today is, one, I just want us to appreciate that complexity and how the human mind responds to messages that you might put out, especially from your organization and especially online. And then I'm hoping that you have the inspiration and the tools to begin experimenting with some of these psychological tactics in order to better communicate with your target audiences. Now, I know there's a lot of associations, nonprofits, universities, government agencies on the call today. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about is going to try to do it through the lens of, mission focused marketing and communications. Now, this is Sigmund Freud. I should point out very clearly, this is not me, okay? I am not Sigmund Freud. I'm also, as a matter of fact, not Fraser Crane or his brother Niles. I'm not a professional psychologist or psychiatrist, but I am Andrew. That's me. I'm a content strategist here at Mighty Citizen. Mighty Citizen is a full service marketing and branding organization that does specialize in mission focused communications. I've spent just about my entire career in that field, marketing and communications. But I have read a bunch of books about this stuff, and I've done all this work with my clients. So I'm hoping to share some of what I've learned with you. And hopefully at the end of the session, we will have time to answer a question or two in the chat box. But if we don't, or if you think of a question later, I want you to feel free to email me at any time at that email address right there. It's abuck@mightycitizen.com. I'll share it again at the end. But I geek out about this stuff, and I'm happy to talk to anyone and everyone about it whenever. Now, I know we're on a webinar, and I know that webinars have become more a part of our lives lately, of course. And it's interesting knowing what we know about the attention span of human beings. Now, back in 2000, a global study across various cultures found that the average human has about a 12-second attention span. Now, that was really impressive compared to the goldfish. Goldfish came in at a measly 9 seconds. But when the same study was conducted a number of years later, our attention span has plummeted to about 8 seconds. I've seen reports that put it under 8 seconds. So now we're actually behind goldfish. Now, why is this important? Well, it's because You have precious few moments to seize the attention of someone who wasn't actively looking to give you their attention, right? You have about 8 seconds to first capture their interest and then convert that into real engagement. Now, that's not especially easy given the 8 seconds, but it's really, really daunting when you consider the amount of content that you are competing with. You know, a lot of times organizations think, okay, who are our direct competitors? So if I'm a university, well, maybe it's the other universities in my class. Or if I'm an association, maybe there is a competing one, or maybe there's a regional or a state version of the association. But the truth is, online, you're not just competing with those folks. You are competing with the entirety of the internet. You're competing against that 8 second attention span, along with the massive amount of content that goes online every 60 seconds. So this is updated for 2020, and you can see if you look around the wheel there, 2.5 million Snapchats created, 694,000 images scrolled on Instagram, for almost 5 million videos are viewed on YouTube every single minute. So that's some of what you're up against. In fact, a study that came out of China suggested that 2.5 quintillion, that's what that number is, quintillion bytes of content or data are created every single day. Now, for the human brain, that is quite a bit to take in. But what's interesting is we know that the brain processes somewhere in the million of 400 billion bits of information per second, right? Which seems like a lot, but we're only aware, that is our consciousness, our conscious understanding of what's actually happening, is limited to somewhere around 2,000 bits of data per second. And so when we talk about communicating effectively with our audiences as professional marketers, what we really should be doing is focusing on how do we get to the subconscious understanding? How do we bypass that very limited prefrontal superficial awareness and catch someone where it really, really matters, where they might be able to be more easily persuaded to do what it is we hope they'll do, whether that's make a donation, sign up for a form, visit our campus, become a member, etc. So the human brain obviously is wildly complex, but the real complexity happens without our awareness of it at all. Now, I do want to start with a little conversation about psychographics. And we put this in here because we get asked this by clients now and then, because you know, demographics we've heard about for a long time. But I want to try something first. And forgive me, I'm a one-man machine here over here today. But I'm going to launch a poll based on this question, and I want to see what the response is. So I'm going to launch that poll. It should pop up on your screen. Let's see if this is working. Now, go to webinar yesterday. We had another one of these webinars, has been working intermittently. But let's go ahead and see if this works. So the question is, does your organization have and or use psychographic profiles of your users? Have y'all done that research and that work? Let's see. So far, it looks like overwhelmingly it's no. Only 4% of y'all are saying yes. And that seems actually a little high to me, but it's pretty impressive that there are some of you who've done that work. So let's talk a little bit more about what exactly that is. So let's imagine that we have someone who's in our target audience, and we'll call her Deepa. We know she exists, or maybe we're just using her as a stand-in for a more generalized user persona, so that we can begin to really craft a deeper understanding of who it is we're trying to communicate with, so that we can obviously communicate more effectively. Now, a lot of organizations are capable of doing a demographic analysis, right, of their users. And demographics are anything you could really kind of put on a form, right? So things like gender, location, level of education, family status, professional status, country of origin, income, religion, and they might come up with a user profile that looks something like this. Now, this is not useless at all. There is use in this. I worry sometimes, though, when organizations try to substitute this for an understanding of what the messaging should be. Now, a psychographic profile, on the other hand, might look something like this. We identify a user who we want to go after, who is generally extroverted, might be labeled as aggressive or type A, highly conscientious, maybe more traditional in their views, and definitely more family focused, maybe than other types of users. So as you can see, just from this very bare bones psychographic profile, what we're really trying to get at is understanding what is the personality profile of the people we want to go after. Now, when I say personality profile, what do I mean? Well, probably the most famous or the most widely used personality assessment is called OCEAN, which is really just an acronym for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Now, some of those words, especially neuroticism, might seem negative, but they're not technically negative. And the idea is that a lot of psychologists, when coming up with personality profiles, basically try to plot each person on a scale of, let's say, for example, 0 to 100 on each one of these 5 measurements. So are they typically more open or less? Are they more conscientious or less? Are they more extroverted or introverted? Are they more agreeable or disagreeable? And are they more sort of calm and accepting, or are they more neurotic? And once you sort of map that, then you have the beginnings of what might be considered a psychographic profile for your users. Now, I want to make sure that I'm real clear about the distinction here. So demographics, right, are really effective at helping shape your overall organizational communication strategy, right? In other words, what channels are we going to go after? Where are we going to invest our resources? What is the timing of the work we're going to do? But psychographics, on the other hand, are much more helpful at actually shaping the messages. So to put it maybe very simply, demographics tell you the how, right? Because if we know that a certain large percentage of our target audience are mothers who live within 100 miles with college degrees, then that gives us some insight into where and when we should try to intercept them and get their attention. But it doesn't tell us to any real reasonable degree what we should actually say and how we should say it when we do have those 8 seconds of their attention. Psychographics begin to tell us more of that, because psychographics speak to the personality, and the personality, of course, helps shape how people actually respond to different messages. So that's the value of psychographics as opposed to demographics. You need both to have a comprehensive picture of your users, of course. And then once we get here, usually the next question I get is, well, okay, well, how do we do that? How do we, map out psychographic profiles? Well, the fact is, it's a very high touch process most of the time. So the first is conducting in-person interviews. Here at Mighty Citizen, a large part of what we do is research, right? And this is part of it. We sit down with users, either prospective users or current users of a client's services or mission, and we just ask them a bunch of questions. And here's a pro tip, by the way. If you decide to do this, if you go out and interview some of your users, I cannot overvalue or overstate, I should say, the value of using silence to really dig deep. If you ask somebody a question, then let them answer. It often is a pretty brief or short answer. But if you just are silent, you just wait an uncomfortable extra second or two, people will fill the silence. And that, in my experience, is where you really get those insights that reveal why they do what they do, how they think about you, how they think about themselves. Now, another thing you can do is focus groups. Now, I want to make sure that we understand the difference between interviews and focus groups, because I think a lot of times we mistake them. Interviews are really good for generalized knowledge. Focus groups are especially good for comparing options. So say, for example, your organization was considering rolling out a big new fundraising campaign, or maybe even like an ad campaign, something that you're going to put out into the world, a new series of continuing education classes. But you want to understand if anyone's going to like them or use them before you spend all the time rolling them out. Focus groups can be really good for that because they allow you to understand how a group of people compare one idea or option to another. Focus groups are not good for generalized sort of personality insight, but they can still help you shape that identity. Oh, by the way, if you decide to run a focus group, please use a questionnaire at first. Because what happens by the end of the focus group is the one or two loudest voices in the rooms dominate. Even with a good facilitator, this is really common. And a questionnaire allows you to capture some really good information up front and then allow the folks to talk. And the third thing you can do, of course, is a survey. This is the more scalable option. We offer, if you were to go to mightysystem.com/insights, we have some resources to help you design and run and launch and analyze surveys. In fact, I think we might have another webinar, live webinar coming up at the end of this month. But the point here is that surveys allow you to gather a lot of information at once, and that's why we love them, because they're relatively low investment of time and energy and potentially high investment of data to use. But question writing is critical. One wrong question can totally skew the insights that you think you've gained, because one thing we say here around the office is that bad questions don't stink. So if you write a survey with bad questions, unless you've done a bunch of them and understand the science behind them, it's really easy to not realize that you're sending out a bad question. There's some sort of bias built into it. So make sure you use those free resources in order to create a great survey. And then, of course, you combine all three of these and you can really begin to bucket out your different personas within your larger target audiences by a deeper understanding of their psychology. Now, obviously, we're still generalizing here. Each person is a unique and wonderful thing, but for purposes of mass communication, which is presumably what you do most days, you want to spend the time creating some generalized personas. We're always just trying to get a little more sophisticated in our messaging, right? Okay. So I want to talk for a minute. I want to revisit this idea of how we think, so that we all are sort of on the same page with, how when we go through our day, our brain processes what it encounters. In order to do that, let's go and do a little math problem. In fact, we're going to do two math problems back to back. All right, here's your first question. What is 2 by 2, or 2 times 2? If you said 4, you're correct. Okay, another easy one here. 23 by 17. Okay, you might know, no, opening the calculator app, no, not allowed. So this is a really good demonstration of the two ways that our minds process information. The first we might call system 1, and the second we might call system 2. In fact, the naming of those came from Daniel Kahneman and his partner Amos Tversky, who shaped this idea really in their behavioral, economic, and psychological testing throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. And in a nutshell, system 1 is our conscious thought, and system 2 is our more deliberative thought. By the way, the answer is 391, if you're curious. Let's flesh this out just a little bit more. Words we might use to describe our system 1 way of thinking. And by the way, system 1 does the vast majority of our, quote, thinking throughout our days. It is the fast, intuitive emotional. That's going to be key. We're going to revisit that here in a minute. And our sort of unconscious thought, right? I think a second ago I said conscious thought. That was a misspeak there. System 2, on the other hand, is more slow, deliberate, logical, and conscious. So when we say, let me think about that, what we're kind of referring to is system 2, right? When we hear 2 times 2, we don't have to think about it in the way we traditionally think about the word think. It is not a deliberative, slow process where we have to kind of crunch up our brow and think, okay, 2 times 2. No, that's all system 1. Fast, intuitive, emotional, unconscious. But when we hear 23 by 17, we actually have to start doing real math in our head, carrying the 1, etc., right? That is slow, deliberative, logical, and conscious. Now, this is a little preview of what I'm about to get to, but as communicators, we want to be, most of the time, aiming for worming our way into our audience's system 1, because that is where the bulk of the thinking happens, and that is the emotional self. And we want to touch that emotional self in order to be able to persuade them to engage with us. A really great metaphor for the system 1, system 2 thing that Kahneman uses is, you know how you can drive to work and pull up in your parking, well, back when we did drive to work, right? But when you drive to work and you pull up in your parking spot, and you kind of have you kind of dawns on you that you have no idea what just happened for the last 20, 30 minutes. Like, you were just driving, you weren't thinking about driving, you just sort of appeared at work because you drive there every day. That's system 1. It's offloading all of that deliberative thought onto system 1 so that you can just, all right, now if you're driving and then suddenly you have to parallel park, that is system 2. You can't just do that intuitively. You have to be a little more deliberate. You have to pay attention. You have to focus your attention on a specific task. So those are the way our brains work throughout the day. But the question is, of course, what does this have to do, well, with marketing or communication? And to quote again Mr. Kahneman in his wonderful book, Thinking Fast and Slow, if there are several ways of achieving the same goal, people will eventually gravitate to the least demanding course of action. Laziness is built deep into our nature. And of course, he's being a little cheeky there, because what he's talking about is sort of cognitive laziness. Our brains don't want to have to think when we're driving to work, okay, put that foot on the gas, not too far, just enough. Okay, hit the blinker. If they can offload that onto system 1, it will. Our brain is constantly looking for shortcuts so that we don't have to use up what is actual energy, actual physical energy on thinking. Okay. So your mission, if you choose to accept it as a communicator, is to constantly pursue cognitive ease. Okay. Cognitive ease is just the measure of how easy it is for our brains to process information. In other words, we want to make things easy, right? Easy on our users, easy on our audiences, easy on each other. Because the moment things don't become easy on our brains and we have to start thinking and our logical self fires up, we're far less likely to pay attention, to stick around, to engage deeply, and to feel anything. Let me show you an example of what I mean. This is the admittedly former homepage of an organization called the Montana Association of Counties. If this is hurting your brain, you're not alone. This is an example we love to use to show what cognitive strain might look like. If you're a user who needs to do something with the Montana Association of Counties and you come to this website, after you recover from a brief cry and begin looking around, you're going to find it very difficult to find. There's 1, 2, 3, I count at least 5 menus, a big old block of text, small text. There's a lot going on here that makes it difficult. And in order sort of easily using it, letting system 1 just sort of naturally move us through the site, system 2 is being taxed and asked to do a lot of work. And it's just not as much fun, and it's certainly not as persuasive. So the question is, what does produce cognitive strain? Well, there's a few things that you can avoid to avoid it. So first of all, poor writing. If a user has to read one of your sentences twice, you're in a lot of trouble, okay? Your writing should be top notch and as short as necessary to do the job, okay? What else here? Number two, too many choices. Right. Too many choices. Every piece of content should have a single call to action. So if you put up a page on your website, or you send out a marketing email, or you put together some donor letter or an annual report, or you launch some sort of campaign, to the best of your ability, really focus it. Keep the writing good and the choices low. Too many choices makes us think too much. We don't want, you know, maybe I'm being a little cheeky when I say this, but I think in general, you want the audiences that you're trying to serve not to think. You want them to feel. We want less thinking, more feeling. Similar to too many choices is too many steps to get to those choices. So if you're asking someone to do something, it should be short. If you've got a donation page because you're a nonprofit or what have you, I should be able to donate within maybe finish donating within 2 or 3 mouse clicks, and a few, obviously, typing in a few pieces of information. And finally, unfamiliar design. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. It's nice to be to push the limits. There's a case to be made for being provocative and unexpected as a way to engage users and seize their attention. But if you go too far afield from what your audiences know and expect, then they're going to have to think too hard. So we want to sort of make our progress iterative when it comes to our communications, and not just sort of wholesale reinvent things. Okay. Oh, by the way, I just wanted to provide an example of what I might consider a cognitively easy homepage. This is the homepage of the American Association of Nurse Practitioners, AANP, and I think it's just a really nice example of ease. Right? It feels like a website. We've all seen websites, plenty of them. The menus are as simple as they need to be. There's not 5 of them. There's a clear call to action right on the front. There's not multiple choices headlining the thing. So just one of many examples I'm sure we could find of cognitive ease. So just as a reminder, keep communications as simple as possible. That says donor communications, but really it applies to everybody. Offload tasks from prospective donors whenever possible, and give information more than asked for. So again, I think you're starting to, sure you're kind of like, yeah, I get it, Andrew. Basically, we want to keep things simple, focused, have a single call to action. Don't ask people to do things that they don't absolutely have to do, right? You know, the example of number 2 that I always think of is when I go to fill out some sort of form online and it asks me for, say, my suffix or even my prefix. Like, you don't need that. You really do not need that. You're not going to do anything with that. So stop asking me for it, right? And number 3 might be, even though this is a way to produce cognitive ease, it actually might serve better as like a thesis statement for the value of content marketing. Our job as marketers and communicators is not to get, it's to give. And then if we give and give and give and give, eventually we will get. It's just math, folks. But it works great with specific communications too, right? Okay. And finally, create more structure online and in your fundraising emails. Structure is really, and what I mean by structure is just make sure your entire website sitemap and individual pages have a clear, repeatable structure. Because the truth is people do consume things differently online than off. We know that. And so you can sort of disobey certain rules when you're putting something in print. But online, we need to sort of reinforce patterns that people are used to. Again, all of this in an attempt to keep people feeling and not thinking too hard. All right, this is the last section of the talk, and basically what we're going to do here is we're going to go over heuristics. There's probably more than 100 heuristics that have been identified and officially named. We're going to look at about 5 or 6 because they're the most relevant to our work in communications. But if you're curious about this, we're also going to share with you what we might call a heuristic cheat sheet, which lists more of them and some descriptions and examples. You're like, okay, but what the hell is a heuristic? Well, a heuristic is any approach to problem solving, learning, or discovery that employs a practical method not guaranteed to be optimal, but sufficient for the immediate goals. Now, if you're reading that and thinking, didn't you just spend 7 minutes talking about how everything needs to be easy and then you give me a definition like that? Well, you're right. Heuristic is just a rule of thumb. It's a fancy word for a rule of thumb. And when we're talking about cognitive heuristics, what we're basically saying is, here are all the ways that the human brain takes shortcuts in order, again, to get things out of system 2 and deep into that easy system 1 mode of thinking. These are all the rules of thumb that our brains employ so that we can get through our days without having to deliberately think about every single thing we encounter, okay? Heuristics, very, very powerful, highly demonstrable. In other words, we know this stuff happens across all humans. You know, obviously some to lesser degrees than others, but we know that these are the rules of thumbs that humans have adopted unknowingly. So the first one I want to talk about is affect. I sometimes want to say affect, just so we're not saying effect, right? So basically affect is just people make decisions quickly by bringing their emotional response into play. And you know, I do a number of webinars and conference presentations and whatnot on a pretty good diverse set of subjects. And it seems like no matter what I'm talking about, I always end up wanting to talk about this or finding a way to talk about this. And when I say this, I mean the role that emotion plays in how we respond and how we persuade others to respond. And it goes back to what I said a minute ago. We want people feeling not. Let me give you an example of what I mean. So this is an example of an advertisement from the Truth Initiative. You've probably heard of the Truth Initiative or encountered their work. The Truth Initiative is an anti-teen smoking campaign. It's been around over 20 years now, I think. And what they do, the Truth Initiative uses emotional advertisements. This is just one. They used to run a bunch of commercials. One of the most famous ones I remember is they ran a commercial where they pulled up in front of the headquarters of Philip Morris, the cigarette manufacturers, and they open the back of this van and they pull out all these body bags, like full body bags, and just start loading them on the steps of the headquarters. And they yell up at him, you know, this is the number of people that your products kill every day. I mean, okay, that's pretty provocative messaging, right? It's very bold, unexpected, and emotional. The emotion being, you know, some combination of anger and fear. About the same time that the Truth campaign started, another campaign started to try to get teenagers not to smoke. And this campaign was called Think, Don't Smoke. Think, Don't Smoke. Ran for a number of years. A lot more traditional, not emotional, not out there, not bold, not provocative. Very like appealing to logic, you know. If you smoke, it will cost you this much money and you might get these diseases someday. And it'll make your breath smell bad, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, if you're curious, Think Don't Smoke was actually run by Philip Morris. That's right. The cigarette manufacturers, they were forced to run these ads when they lost a number of high-profile lawsuits in the 90s. So here we have 2 attempts to get teens not to smoke. One is emotional, one is highly logical. When analyzed, we learned that teens who were exposed only to the emotional campaign of the Truth Initiative were 66% less likely to ever smoke. Wow. That's pretty impressive, right? 60, I mean, by any sort of ad measure, that is a huge conversion rate. Now, the question I'll let you answer for yourself is, what was the reduction in smoking among teens exposed only to the Think Don't Smoke ad? Well, the answer is 36%. Oh, that is 36% more likely, right? So these teens are more likely to smoke if they are appealed to by logic, and far less likely to smoke when appealed to with emotion. So how do you use this in your communications? Well, the first is just really, it's as simple as use emotion. Acknowledge that you are communicating with emotional creatures. I think sometimes we appeal far too much to the logical side. Now, how do we do this? How do we appeal to emotion? Well, we tell stories. We acknowledge our own humanity. We don't pretend that we are robots and they are robots. These are the 4 human emotions, by the way: mad, sad, glad, and afraid. And every other emotion is pretty much a combination or shade of these 4 basic emotions. And of course, as you might guess, fear, afraid, right? And maybe in a distant second, anger, are the best ways to persuade people. And I'm not encouraging you to be craven or to stir up fear where it doesn't exist. Gosh knows we don't need any more of that these days. But people have actual fears. And if your organization can do something to calm or assuage their fears, then it would probably be silly not to at least acknowledge that and to acknowledge how you can make their lives better by improving their emotional state, right? Feeling, not thinking. And so that's the affect heuristic. All right, let's talk about this one. This one, I'm guessing a lot of you have heard of before. It's kind of woven its way into pop culture a little bit more. Anchoring. So anchoring is just the human tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information offered, which we might call the anchor, when making decisions. Now, if we were in a room at a conference right now during this talk, I would have already conducted this really cool experiment that we do that really drives this point home. Unfortunately, we're online and it's really not possible to do this easily online. But let me tell you what we do in the room. So the first is we hand out a bunch of questionnaires to everyone in the room. Each person gets one questionnaire. And half the room unknowingly gets one version of the questionnaire. And the other half of the room gets another version. And the 2 versions are almost identical. The only difference is the red text you see there. So it's 2-question questionnaire. One is the tallest redwood tree in California more or less than 150 feet? And number 2 is, what's your best estimate of how tall the tallest redwood tree in California is? So they say yes or no to question 1, and then they fill out their guess on question 2. Now the other half of the room gets this version of the questionnaire. And the only difference is, instead of saying, is it taller or shorter than 150 feet, is we've upped it way up to 810 feet. And then we ask them to provide their guess. And what happens inevitably is the 2 guesses for question 2 are wildly different based on the anchor from question 1. So on average, folks guess on version A, when they're anchored to 150 feet, they guess, oh, it's about 225 feet. Now, the version B, where folks are anchored to 810 feet, the average response is 1,125 feet. Wow, that's quite a big difference. And the only thing that accounts for that huge difference in their perception was that random number in question number 1. If you're curious, the actual answer is 380 feet. That's anchoring at its most sort of obvious. But of course, the question is, how do we actually use this? How do we use the fact that the first number or thing people encounter affects how they perceive the things or numbers immediately following it. Well, the most obvious is in sort of online forms, especially when there's some sort of purchase. So here I'm especially talking to the nonprofits, I'm talking to the associations out there who are trying to get memberships. I might even talking to universities in their fundraising. Here's an example. This is actually from Zoom, believe it or not, Zoom, which is suddenly become such a huge part of everybody's life. But Zoom says, all right, I'm going to anchor you to a $14.99 monthly cost to use our product. And then suddenly the next number seems lower. I mean, it is lower, but it seems lower even though it's an annual billing. So notice that one is we'll charge you month to month, but what Zoom really wants, they don't want that month to month. They want that annual bill. That's much better for their strategic objectives. So they anchor at a higher monthly price, then the annual cost seems like much more of a saving than it would have been if it said $149.90 annual. So when designing donor forms, when designing membership levels, when designing anything where you have a real clear objective, right? I want the user to do X. Decide whether you can anchor them to some other option so that in comparison, what you really want them to do seems much more reasonable. Similar to anchoring is something else, and I'll show you an example of what I mean here. If I'm at a movie theater and they have two sizes of popcorn, small for $6 and a large for $12. Okay, most folks, and this is an actual study, by the way, so when I say most folks, I mean literally, end up going for the small. But when you introduce a third option, a medium at $10.50, guess what people order? Suddenly they start ordering the large. Why is that? Well, it's because of something called the decoy effect. Kind of similar to anchoring, but the decoy effect says that people tend to change their preference between two options when a third option is presented as asymmetrical. So the way I might do this, if I were an alumni group trying to raise money, I would make sure that my online donation form, if I want most people to give us $50, then I might do, you know, a $10 option, a 40 and a 50, because the difference between 40 and 50 seems so much smaller. So play around with this. And when I say play around with it, I mean experiment and keep an eye, right? Follow it closely. Maybe you decide to go back and mix up your donation form so that the higher numbers are first, or that your recurring monthly donation number is higher and is anchored to a lower number. Whatever you decide to do, make sure you're keeping a close eye on your analytics so that you can see, well, this is not working or it is, and then maybe you can make the change permanent or experiment even further. So anchoring and decoy effect, quite similar in that sense. Okay, now I'm going to do a poll. All right, so I want you to read the screen. I'll read it aloud with you. I'm going to give you a technological invention. This is a breakthrough that will increase the country's wealth. It'll make us all more efficient and productive, and frankly, it'll make our lives a lot more fun. And the only thing I want in return is that once a year, you let me swoop in, pick 40,000 people totally at random, and kill them. All right, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to put out a poll, and forgive me, I haven't done much of these polls. Okay, here we go. Do you take that deal? That is the question. We're going to launch this, and I'm really curious what percentage of the room. It looks like we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 320 people. So that's the deal. Well, I'll give you this great technological invention. It's going to make life more efficient, productive, and fun. The only thing is, once a year, I get to kill 40,000 people at random. Okay, the responses are pouring in. Okay, right now we're at like 8% would take it, 86% say no. Some not sure's in there. Overwhelmingly, it looks like y'all are saying no. 87%, we'll call it there. 87% of y'all said no, I would not take that deal. Well, of course, you have already taken that deal because the invention I'm talking about is the automobile, right? So we know that unfortunately deaths from car accidents are around 40,000 per year, but obviously it does all those other things too, making our lives more efficient, productive, and more fun. So what just happened there? If I had presented the car first and then asked the question, I'm guessing there'd be a far greater number of you who would be willing to take that deal. 87% of you said you wouldn't because you didn't know what I was talking about. And that's something we call framing. Framing is probably, at least from my understanding and point of view on this subject, is maybe the most powerful heuristic that our brains rely on. So our choices are influenced by the way they are framed through different wording, settings, situations, right? And that was an example of that just now. I framed things. Let me show you a few more examples. This one's classic, right? If you choose to see the black as the background, then you're seeing two faces looking at each other. But if you choose to see the white as the background, then you see sort of a vase or candelabra, right? Candlestick. Here's some more. Taxes are, quote, a social burden versus taxes are, quote, an investment in society. Drug addiction is a law and order problem. Drug addiction is a public health problem. We are facing a crisis. We are facing a challenge. You want to buy beef that's 80% lean or buy beef that's 20% fat? Framing is so pervasive. It's often done unconsciously, and it's so powerful. They hire consultants for politicians specifically to figure out what to call taxes, a social burden or investment in society, because they know how things are framed greatly affects how we feel about them and interpret them. So why does this, this is a great example of that. So let's say you're having an event like a conference or something, and you've got an early bird special, right? You could present it two ways. You could say, if you register after June 15th, you're going to pay $50 more. Or you could say, if you register before June 15th, you pay $50 less. Exact same truth, just framed differently. In an experiment done in Europe, they found that framing as a negative ensured that 92% of folks registered early, but framing it as a positive, only 67% did. So this is maybe something some of you can use like tomorrow, right? If you've got an event later this fall or something. So the point here is that framing is very powerful, so we just need to be aware of it. The words and images we choose matter. All right, peak end rule says that people judge an experience based on an average of how they felt at the peak and at the end. We don't think of every single moment of an experience. We think of the most intense moment and the very end of the moment, and that's how we remember it. Let me show you what I mean. Here are two charts, patient A and patient B, recording their pain levels during a, shall we say, sensitive medical procedure. It's a colonoscopy. Fun, right? Colonoscopy. And patient A had about a 9-minute, patient B had about a 25-minute session, so a much longer session. But you can see this is their levels of pain intensity that they recorded at each minute during the session. So the poll I'll put out is, which patient, patient A or patient B, thought of the procedure as more painful? So patient A or patient B, who considered it more painful? And we'll launch that right now, and then we'll wrap up here. Okay, patient A with the 9-minute, patient B with the 24-minute, 25-minute. Okay. Right. Okay, look, let's about, let's see, 2/3 of y'all, a little more than 2/3 are saying the 9-minute person said it was more painful. And and about 2/3 of y'all are saying the 9-minute one. You're probably catching on that a lot of my questions are pretty sneaky here. Well, going back, patient A thought that the experience was much more painful. Even though it was about 1/3 as long, The way it ended so painfully that they remembered it as a much more negative or painful experience. Patient B, the pain sort of gradually lowered over time until it was pretty low at the very end. And so they remembered the experience as less painful. So how do you use the peak end rule? You need to be designing amazing experiences at the end. I mean, designing them, right? How are you going to end a particular engagement with your users? You need to make it really magical and special. Go above and beyond. A great example I heard of recently was from the dog or the pet food company Chewy. You know, they're like a subscription service. They mail you your pet food every month or whatever. And this woman called them and said, I need to cancel the next 2 months because my dog died. And so what Chewy did was they sent flowers, they sent a card that they'd all signed and some other things. They designed that into the process. And so even though it was a terrible situation for that customer, Chewy made sure that for at least a moment, the end of their engagement with this customer was something special and real, by the way. I would encourage you all to find magical, special ways of interacting with your users. Do something different. Okay, let me check. I know we're up against it on time. Let me see. Okay. Actually, if y'all don't mind, I'm going to take a real quick second, like I should, to wash my hands. And while I do that, if you could go ahead and complete the following word, and I'll come right back. All right, wink, wink. Okay, as you might have guessed, I'm not actually washing my hands. I'll do that when I'm done, I promise. I'm guessing that a number of you went with SOAP, soap. And that's because of something called priming. If I had said, actually, I need to take a break I need to take a real quick bite of my lunch, and then asked you to fill that in, you might have come up with soup. And maybe some of you still came up with soup. But the idea is that by mentioning washing my hands, it primed you to think of another word. Similarly, if I say the word banana, followed immediately by the word vomit, what I've done is I've created this prime in you. So the next time you see a banana, or like if you see a banana today, or even if you really see something yellow, it might create this association in your mind. I primed you to think of something gross like vomit when you see a banana. This is really powerful stuff if you use it, and it's priming. It's when people are exposed to one stimulus, it affects how they respond to another stimulus. The point here is that words create association, so please choose your words very wisely. If you decide to say you versus we, that means a lot. Join the giving club voice versus join the giving society. Donation form versus donate today. These words matter. By the way, images you choose to put out into the world from your organization matter too. A famous one is from the Challenger School, which is just a kind of normal private kind of charterish school. But on their website, if you went to their website and looked at it, you might think the school is only for children of Asian descent, even though it's totally not. Any kid can go there that wants to go there. But they are priming you to think of that. Now, I'm not saying that it's a mistake on their part. They might be very strategic with this. They want to increase enrollment from a certain target audience, so they prime the audience to see themselves in those images. But this stuff really does have serious influence. You got to be very mindful of the images and words you use. Okay, last little poll we're going to do here. I want to describe this woman to you. Her name is Sarah. Sarah loves New Age music. She definitely reads her horoscope every day. In her spare time, Sarah enjoys yoga, aromatherapy. She attends a local spirituality group. So the question I want to ask about Sarah for you is, which is more likely? And I've got 3 options here for Sarah. Which is most likely? Is it more likely that Sarah is a school teacher, a life coach, or a holistic healer? Given what you know about her, what do you think the most likely job for Sarah is? All right, we got about 55% of y'all saying she's a holistic healer. We got about 30% of y'all saying she's a life coach. Looks like only 18% say she's a teacher. If you answered A, that Sarah's a teacher, well, of course you're right. And why is that? Well, that's because there's a heck of a lot more teachers than there are life coaches or holistic healers. But you weren't thinking in terms of numbers there. You were primed with all this detail about her. So you jumped to the conclusion, not all of you, but many of you, that she must be some sort of like life coach or healer or something like that. When the numbers, the sheer numbers would say it's far more likely that she's a school teacher. And that is the power of representativeness. People judge the probability of an event by finding similar known events, assuming the probabilities are similar, which is just a fancy way of saying we judge books by their covers, for better or worse. I'm going to skip past this because we're at the end. But here's how I want you to use representativeness, right? Show users what they expect to see, right? Show them what they expect to see. Use their vocabulary, not yours. That is so key. I can't emphasize that enough. And I don't just mean the big industry jargon or lingo that you use. I mean, like, what is the actual language that the people you're trying to communicate with? How do they talk? How do they write? What do they read? And then use that language. If you're going to introduce something new, a product, a service, some sort of resource, try to immediately compare it to something they already know, because that's how people become familiar and engage with new stuff when it feels linked to something they already know and feel comfortable with. That's the power of representativeness, and frankly, a little bit of priming sprinkled in there. So, sum this all up today. We're at the very end. Invest resources to really segment, your prospective donors or users by their psychographics, and then use those insights to craft your messages. Humans think using those two systems, right? And we want people in system one, the emotional, intuitive, unconscious thinking, as opposed to deliberative, focused, often very skeptical and cynical system two. And experiment with these heuristics. Make sure you check out that heuristic cheat sheet when we send that along shortly. See if any of those, investigate more, read more about them, and then play around with them, because there are going to be some instances where you find they're quite powerful influencers on the people you're trying to serve. We are going to send you the slides and the cheat sheet, so you don't actually have to go to this URL to get them. You can get a bunch of other free stuff from us, tools and templates and stuff, and other webinars on other subjects by going to mightycitizen.com/tools. And then finally, I did want to offer one more time my name and my email address, abuck@mightycitizen.com. I think we have so many people, and we're at 1:58 Central Time, that unfortunately we can't take questions right now. But again, feel free to email me and be on the lookout for our stuff. And by the way, we're doing a series of these webinars because we're all stuck at home over this month, and you can learn about those and register also at the website. So I do want to thank you all for the work that you do. It's more important now than it ever has been. And I can't wait to hopefully talk and meet y'all face to face at some point in the near future. Thank you and have a great day.